Welcome! You had a lot of videos to choose from, but you clicked on this one, and for that, I thank you. And I think that you made a good decision, because if you're gonna watch a chess game today, why not watch the greatest one ever played? Even if you've seen it before, this game is like a fine work of art. You're not just gonna hang it up on your wall, look at it one time, and then forget about it. No, you're gonna stare at it every day for hours on end, marveling at its vast and unfathomable intricacies. The game was played in 1999 between the greatest player alive at that time, and maybe of all time, Garry Kasparov, and his very worthy opponent, Super Grandmaster Veselin Topalov. Now, what makes this game so special is that it features an unbelievable sacrifice that I'm prepared to call the greatest ever played. Not only because of the insane amount of calculation that is required to verify that it actually works, but because Kasparov was actually able to calculate the most important variation all the way out to its logical conclusion. And when you see what he was able to see over the board in his mind, you're just going to be floored. I'm talking 16 moves for white, 15 for black, so 31 total moves that he was able to calculate, and what a variation it is. You're going to see brilliancies within brilliancies, leaving you completely overwhelmed and with little doubt in your mind that Garry Kasparov is the greatest calculator in the entire history of chess. Sorry, Magnus, but I think he has you beat in that department. Although I will say that it is possible that Magnus Carlsen is as strong, if not stronger than Kasparov ever was, due to his incredible intuition, which I think enables him to rely a little less heavily on brute force calculation. But I digress, we need to get into this game. It was played in the annual Tata Steel tournament held in Wijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. Garry Kasparov has Team White, and he kicks off his most immortal masterpiece with e4. Topalov responds d6, the Pirt's defense. Kasparov erects his dynamic duo, as one does. Knight to f6 hits e4, knight to c3 defends. We have g6, preparing the bishop to be on keto as he fianchettos. He's been watching his carbs. I know that one's a bit of a stretch, but I'm a bit sleep deprived today, so that's the best I got. Kasparov puts his bishop on e3. This is well-known opening theory. Knight to f3 is a popular alternative, but Kasparov is going for a rapid queenside castling, keeping the move f3 on the table to support a possible g4, a standard pawn storm brewing kind of move in opposite castling scenarios. Topalov now sets his sacred sniper's sights down the sable slide with bishop to g7, and after queen to d2, he plays c6, preparing a possible pawn expedition of his own in the direction of the castle that he thinks will most likely be harboring the white king very shortly. Kasparov places f3, here comes b5, and now knight g to e2, a good flexible move, as is knight b to d7. Since neither king has yet been committed to any particular side of the board, neither player is very eager to go all out on a wing attack just yet. A pretty typical sort of waiting game that you'll see in positions like these, and one that at this moment Kasparov has apparently had enough of. He's ready to do something concrete, and so he puts his bishop on h6, looking to trade off one of black's best pieces and the protector of his weakened dark squares. Topalov says, "That's cool, I'll just go ahead and initiate the trade," and after queen to h6, feel free to have fun over there on the king side while I prepare to castle on the queen side with bishop to b7. Kasparov's hip to what's happening though. He decides it's a good time to play a3, preventing an immediate b4 to harass his knight on c3. Now that black is most likely going to be castling on the queen side, if he castles at all, Kasparov is not as concerned about Topalov pushing his pawns on that side of the board with a5 followed by b4 biting into his queenside pawn structure, as he is with securing his knight's position on c3, thus maintaining central control. And his instincts are pretty spot on, as that's where Topalov strikes next with e5. Kasparov responds by castling queenside. It is the most seaworthy move in the position, according to our great aquatic advisor. Topalov puts his queen on e7. We have king to b1, a move you'll very often see after a queenside castling, usually because it makes the king a bit safer. Although in this particular case, the main reason may be to clear the way for knight to c1 in response to a5, as indicated by Kasparov himself in his later analysis. We're not going to delve into that line though, because what's played in the game is a6. The engine's not impressed. It actually much preferred leaving the king in the center and going for a5 and b4, but Topalov is determined to castle queenside, and so after knight to c1, that's exactly what he does. We have the reroute of the knight to b3, renewing central control, maybe looking to jump into a5 when the moment is right and give a little tickle to the bishop on b7. Topalov now decides to take action in the center with e takes d4, seeing that he had nothing else very useful to do at this point. Kasparov recaptures with his rook, keeping knight to a5 on the table, and now comes c5, a very ambitious and fully engine-approved move. Kasparov retreats his attacked rook to d1, at which point we get to see the usefulness of Topalov having played the move a6, which is that the b5 pawn is defended, enabling him to play an immediate knight to b6, supporting d5 next. Black is ahead in development, having completed his development, whereas white still has the disconnected rooks, so breaking open the center is a very good and natural plan. And I'll bet you won't guess what Kasparov plays next. It's the very sneaky g3, preparing bishop to h3 with check, which if black were to now play his d5, might not even be executed right away, because a more concerning move would be queen to f4, cutting off the black king's corridor to the safety of his inner sanctum before playing bishop to h3. Now the engine's not too worried about this, it's just saying to play d5 anyway, leave the king on c8, and then block the bishop check with knight f to d7 if necessary. But Topalov, being the human unit that he is, thinks that that looks a bit sketchy, so he puts his king on b8 while he has the chance. Now comes knight to a5, hitting the bishop, it goes to a8, we have bishop to h3, getting on that nice open diagonal, connecting the rooks, and now comes d5. Kasparov takes a move to get his queen back in the action with the check from f4. The king is tucked away on a7. Next we have the obvious rook h to e1 getting lined up on the black queen, threatening the take on d5 with a discovery. Topalov prevents that with d4, but now comes knight to d5, hitting the knight on f6 twice, hitting the queen, and so forcing Topalov to capture on d5. When after e takes d5, threatening rook takes queen with check and queen to d6, getting out of the way, it's looking like Topalov is going to be rounding up that totally undefended pawn on d5, which he is now attacking 4 times. He's also threatening to trade queens, damaging white's pawn structure. So what to do as white? Well, I think most strong players would probably go for the second best move in this position, which is knight to c6 check. When after bishop takes knight, you can trade queens, and then get your rook into e7, with some decent counterplay, though probably not nearly enough, if in the engine we continue to place our trust. But Kasparov is not most strong players. In fact, he's not even most chess goats. He's the greatest goat of all time, which is to say he's the greatest of all time, arguably, as evidenced by his astounding decision in this position to find and execute what is quite possibly the greatest move ever played. If you have no idea what it is, feel free to pause and peruse the position, but here it comes. It's the earth-shattering, chess universe-denting, rook takes d4. Now immediately after this stunning sacrifice was offered, Kasparov said that he got up from the board and began to walk around. He said that he was praying Topalov would take his rook, and that here on move 24, he was able to work out in his mind the entire winning variation for white that did end up getting played in the game, and which ends on move 39. Now I should mention that he does have a safety net in the form of a forced draw that white will have the opportunity to execute on move 30 if he wants to, so there was a little extra incentive to play this, as he didn't have a lot of risk. You know, as they say, long variations equal wrong variations, but as you're about to see, that maxim doesn't really apply when you're the greatest calculator of all time calculating your all-time greatest calculation. Now, I don't know anything about Kasparov's religious beliefs, but he did get the answer to his prayer that he was hoping for, as Topalov does now accept the rook with c takes d4, which is a losing blunder, although about as far from being obviously so as a move could possibly be. What should have been played is king to b6. This is the move that Kasparov was most worried about, attacking his knight on a5, when white should respond b4. If black takes the rook here, then after queen takes d4 check and king to c7, there's queen to a7 forcing mate. So with best play from both sides, we'd instead see something like knight takes d5, queen takes d6 check, rook takes d6, b takes c5 check with the fork, so king takes c5 is forced, and after knight to b3 with check defending the rook, we have material as well as positional equality. For whatever reason, Topalov does not go down this road, and in the game, perhaps out of sheer morbid curiosity, he does go ahead and take the rook on d4. And if you've never seen this game before, see if you can guess what Kasparov plays next. I think that most players would have queen takes d4 check on the brain, but this would actually lose to queen to b6 blocking, and white just has nothing. The correct move, now played by Kasparov, is the stunning brilliancy number 2, rook to e7 check. sacrificing his other castle, and this one absolutely may not be accepted. For if queen takes e7, there comes a forced mate in 4 moves with queen takes d4 check, when there is no queen to b6 to block, and after king to b8 and queen to b6 check, there is no king to c8 as white's bishop has that square covered, so black has to block with his bishop, but now comes knight to c6 check, exploiting the pin, king to a8 is black's only legal move, and now we have queen to a7 checkmate. So what's played in the game, in response to the incredible rook to e7, is king to b6. But before we look at that, let me quickly just mention king to b8. Here we would have queen takes d4 threatening mate on a7. If black takes the rook, then queen to b6 check still forces mate. The best try might be to block with knight to d7, but after bishop takes d7, you can't take with the queen because you got to guard against queen to b6, and if you take with the rook, then you end up losing your rook on h8. And from here, there's all kinds of crazy lines. One fun one is bishop takes d5, threatening bishop to a2 check, winning the white queen, which is why white now has to play c4, hitting the bishop, threatening knight to c6 check, followed by queen to a7 mate, with a still crushing position. And I don't know how much of this variation Kasparov had worked out, but there's just tons of these crazy sidelines that you would have to calculate in order to be 100% sure that this whole sacrificial attack even works. So I think Kasparov was relying on intuition to some degree, but getting back to what was played, in response to the second sacrifice on e7, which is king to b6, hitting the knight on a5, Kasparov now plays queen takes d4 with check. Black has but 2 legal moves. One is queen to c5. This was not played in the game, seeing that after queen takes knight on f6 with check, if black were to now take the knight on a5, then b4 check would be a fork of his king and queen. He can try blocking with queen to d6, but here's an incredible move that white cannot win without playing. Are you ready for this? Bishop to e6. Who the hell finds that? And was Kasparov aware of this move during the game? Who even knows? I wouldn't put anything past him, but the idea is to avoid the trade of queens. Pawn takes bishop would of course lose the queen to rook takes e6, pinning it to the king, with a winning endgame for white after queen takes rook, when black cannot capture the knight on a5 lest he get mated, beginning with b4 check and ending with queen takes a6. White's now threatening to play b4 to prevent that queen to c5 move to block the deadly check from d4 by the queen. You can try king takes a5 here, but that move ends up getting played in the game, so we won't look at it just yet. Another option is bishop takes d5, but after b4, bishop takes e6 would run into rook to b7 checkmate. And if bishop to c6 is tried, giving the queen a view of d4, then we have queen takes f7, threatening mate in 2, starting with rook to b7 check. Black can defend with rook to b8, but after knight takes c6, queen takes c6, and queen to f4, black has no good defense against either queen to d4 or queen to e3 with check, forcing mate. So another beautiful sideline for you. We got games within games here, and we're only scratching the surface because I do want to keep this video a reasonable length. So if I've omitted any lines that you feel are pertinent, I do apologize and do encourage you to mention them in the comments. But let's look at what was played in the game, which after queen takes d4 check is king takes knight on a5. White is now down 2 full pieces for which he only has 2 pawns and a rook that is still under attack. But after Kasparov's next move, b4 check, forcing Topalov to put his king on a4 since b6 is now covered by the queen, and queen to c3 now threatening queen to b3 checkmate, black is in big trouble. They say a knight on the rim is grim, but you know what's even grimmer? A king on the rim who's stranded deep in enemy territory. Now I should mention that an immediate rook to a7 would have been stronger, as it would have prevented Topalov's next move, queen takes d5, watching over b3, when rook takes a6 would just be checkmate. But this position is still totally winning for white, and Kasparov has not objectively spoiled anything. He now continues with his only winning move, rook to a7, threatening that checkmate. Bishop to b7 is the best defense, and what do you think Kasparov plays here? Pause the video and take a wild guess. If you said queen to c7, threatening queen to a5 checkmate, then congratulations, you found the draw by repetition that I mentioned earlier. That goes queen to d1 check, king to a2, queen to d5 check, king to b2, queen to d4 check, king to b1, queen to d1 check, etc. This was the safety net that Kasparov had foreseen, since without executing this perpetual check, black would just be getting mated. What's played in the game, though, is not the drawing queen to c7, but rather another sacrifice, rook takes b7, when the queen may not recapture or else queen to b3 is checkmate. So, did Topalov just totally miss this? No. He's happy that rook takes a6 is no longer a threat because now he's able to play queen to c4 and challenge the white queen's position. Before we look at that though, I want to show you a move that Topalov mentioned to Kasparov the day after this game was played. Apparently he was racking his brain trying to come up with ways he could have saved himself, as we tend to do while in the throes of post-mortem regret, and the move he came up with was rook h to e8. So what does this do? Well, after rook to b6 threatening rook takes a6, here you can defend with rook to a8. And if you're wondering what the point of the rook on e8 is, well, I'll tell you. If white were to play king to b2, then black's only defense against the forced mate beginning with queen to b3 would be to put his queen on e5, defended by the rook, pinning the white queen to the king, and so preventing queen to b3. Of course, with white's king on b2, capturing the queen after it goes to b3 is not going to work, since the recapture c takes b3 would be check and mate. So king to b2 is not working for white here, but in this position, white does have a winning move. Even spotting it in this position would be beyond impressive, but to see it 7 moves ago when the rook was sacrificed on d4 would be an astounding feat of board vision. And this is another move that I'm not sure if Kasparov actually saw over the board, but here it is. The move is bishop to f1, guarding c4. And you know what white is threatening now? Rook to d6, forcing black's queen off of the light square diagonal, followed by queen to b3 checkmate. You can try rook e to d8 defending against that, but now comes rook to c6 with the threat of going to c5, forcing the queen to e6, since black's got to keep guarding b3. But then after king to b2, how are you going to hop on the dark square diagonal to pin the queen to the king so that white doesn't force checkmate with queen to b3? There's only the e5 square, but the queen has no protection there and will simply be lost. Now black does have some things he can try in this position. No time to look at all of them, but I do want to show you this one line with knight to e8. Since after rook to c5, queen to e6, and king to b2, threatening that mate in 2 with queen to b3 check, here black is able to play queen to f6, pinning the queen to the king, defended by the knight. So, is white just busted here? No, there's an absolutely gorgeous checkmate in 4 moves on the board. Take a moment if you'd like to try to work it all out, but here it comes. With queen takes f6, knight takes f6, and now the astonishing bishop to c4, threatening bishop to b3 checkmate, a move that would not be possible without white having played that move bishop to f1, in which case he'd just be losing. But here, black's only way to prevent bishop to b3 checkmate is to play b takes c4, but this allows the beautiful rook to a5 checkmate. So is that not the most exquisite thing you've seen all week? I told you there'd be brilliancies within brilliancies, but let's get back to the main brilliancy. Rook takes b7, to which Topalov responds queen to c4. He wants those ladies off the board, for reasons that I hope are pretty clear at this point. Not that he's going to get his wish or anything, at least not without dropping some material, since Kasparov is now able to take the knight on f6, renewing the threat of checkmate by taking on a6 with the queen. Now the best defensive try here just might be rook to d1 check, king to b2, and rook to a8, defending a6. When after queen to b6, threatening queen to a5 checkmate, you got queen to d4 check, forcing the queen trade. And after queen takes d4, rook takes d4, it looks like black just might be okay. But after bishop to d7, preventing him from trying to free his imprisoned king with a5, since bishop takes b5 would be checkmate, black is all tied up and without a prayer. He's got to be on constant guard against white checkmating him by capturing his pawn on a6. There's also the issue of white's bishop making its way to b3, which would be checkmate, not to mention the weak kingside pawns that white can go after with his rook whenever the moment is right. So not too hard to see why the engine is giving a 3-pawn advantage to white here. What's tried in the game, in response to queen takes f6, is king takes a3. Kasparov grabs on a6 with check. King takes b4 is the only move. And once again, it looks like black just might survive. Kasparov later remarked that he thought Topalov may have been expecting bishop to d7 here, just ganging up on black's b-pawn, but then black could sack the exchange with some pretty decent chances of survival. But Kasparov had foreseen a much more powerful winning alternative with the move c3 check. Now, if king to c5, then rook to c7 will pick up the queen. If king to b3, then we have queen to a2 check, king takes c3, queen to b2 check, and king to d3. When rook to e7 would force mate in 7, but even simpler is just bishop to f1 check, winning the queen that way. So this was not played. It's pretty easy to see that queen takes c3 would go down in flames very quickly to queen takes b5 check, forcing mate in another 2 moves. So what's tried is king takes c3. Now comes queen to a1 check. If king to b3, then we'll have queen to b2 check, forcing the king to a4, followed by rook to a7 mate. King to d3, of course, loses the queen, so that move bishop to f1. King to b4 fails to queen to b2 check, and if you block with the queen, then the queen is lost to rook takes b5 check. Going to c5 loses the queen to rook to c7, and if king to a5, then we have queen to a3 check, forcing queen to a4, and rook to a7 check, winning the queen that way. So what's played in the game is king to d2. Kasparov now delivers check from b2. Not a lot of options for black here, and no good ones. What's played is king to d1, seeing that king to e1 would just allow the rook to get to e7 with check, forcing the king to d1 anyway. If black tries king to e3, then we have rook to e7 check, forcing checkmate on the next move, unless black sacrifices his queen. For example, if king takes f3 were to be played, see how fast you can spot the mate in 1. You got it? It's queen to g2, checkmate. Okay, moving on to the move that's played in response to queen to b2 check, which is king to d1. This brings us to what is perhaps the most incredible moment of the entire game, where all the way back on move 24, after sacrificing his first piece, Garry Kasparov had worked out that in this position he would have a single winning move. Take a moment, take an hour, and see if you can find white's only path to victory. The move Kasparov spotted 11 moves ago is bishop to f1. Attacking the black queen, who absolutely must keep defending against both queen to c1 and queen to e2, either of which would be checkmate without the black queen defending those squares. So what to do? Taking the bishop would run into checkmate in 3 with queen to c2 check, king to e1, rook to e7 check, with mate coming next. So the only reasonable defense that black has is the move now played by Topalov, rook to d2, counterattacking the white queen, when yet again, it kind of looks like black just might survive. But Kasparov's insane calculation is not over yet, because in this position, he has foreseen yet another stunning brilliancy, and this one is just sick. Feel free to pause and ponder, but here it comes. Rook to d7, pinning the black rook to the king, and so preventing rook takes queen on b2. White's now threatening mate in 1 on d2, against which there is no good defense except to take the rook on d7. Rook to d5 would fail to rook takes rook, since queen takes rook would allow queen to e2 checkmate. So after Topalov's rook takes d7, we do have bishop takes queen on c4, and after b takes c4, we now have the cherry on top of this all-time greatest sacrificial combination ever played, queen takes rook on h8. Without this final move, black would be winning, having the 2 rooks for the queen with this dangerous passer on c4. But Kasparov, somehow, through whatever miraculous combination of intuition and raw calculating power that he was able to muster, had seen that at the end of it all, the rook on h8 would be hanging, giving him the opportunity to seize a decisive material advantage. The game continues for a few moves. We have rook to d3. Topalov figures he might as well try to do something with this passer. He's planning to push it to c3 next, defended by the rook. But Kasparov knows just what to do. He plays queen to a8, so that after c3, he can play queen to a4 check, controlling the square in front of the pawn. If king to d2, then the queen comes into c2 with check. So we have king to e1, after which queen to c2 would actually lose to rook to d1 check, king to a2, and rook to d2, pinning and winning the queen. And can you imagine if the game ended like that? Would that not be the worst thing to ever happen in the whole history of chess? Kasparov is not about to allow that, though. He plays f4 since his pawn on f3 was hit by the rook, and after f5, king to c1, rook to d2, and queen to a7, targeting the pawn on h7. Veselin Topalov has had his fill, and in this position resigns the game. Seeing that he can't really do anything with his passed pawn, if he pushes it to c2, then queen to e3 check just wins the rook. So a very appropriate resignation in what I'm calling the greatest game ever played. Let me know in the comments if you concur, or if you don't. I had sort of forgotten just how incredible this game really is. I hadn't looked at it in a long time, so if you'd asked me even a few days ago, I might have told you that I thought some other game was the greatest ever. Maybe Bobby Fischer's game of the century against Donald Byrne. But after looking at this one again, I just can't remember ever seeing anything that quite compares to it, so my stance is now clear. But if there's a game that you think has this one beat, please let me know about it in the comments, and I might just cover it in a future video. But that's all for now. Thank you for joining me here today. Consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed the content and would like to see more like it very soon. and I will see you soon.